Hey everybody. I wanted to quickly, I say quickly, with time allowed, to share some testimony, my testimony. The Father last night, really for the last couple of days, but last night I had a dream, vision, night vision. I was asleep and I heard rain and I saw pouring rain, and then I woke up, but I woke up alarmed from this rain. I went back to sleep. I'm not fully sure what that means yet. I have some ideas, but anyway, that's what started it. So I fell back asleep, and then I woke up again, and it was about 1:10 in the morning, and I just had a hard time going back to sleep. And Jesus was laying out in my mind it's like he helped me run through my testimony in my mind. So he put it in my spirit to share it. So I also want to explain really quick, because he wanted me to start off with explaining that a lot of people misunderstand whenever he says that he's God and he doesn't change. They misunderstand what that means. And I'm only saying, I think the reason why you wanted me to say that too is because, and I'll explain it here in just a second, because he told me in this last message that I shared that it was going to be my last video. So I do want to explain that sometimes he speaks in future, and then other times it's simply because he changes his mind. Okay? So, whenever it says that he's God and he doesn't change, it's not about his mind. He doesn't change as like who he is. He doesn't change, his character doesn't change. He's always going to be the creator. That is what he means by he does not change. But he does change his mind. It's all in scripture. I just encourage you to go look that up. There's many times that he repented from certain things. He does say that. You can go search that up and find it. And he does change his mind. He'll say that he wants to destroy a people because he's angry and upset with them because they're walking in disobedience, and then he relents and he changes his mind. He doesn't do it. So that is biblical. So moving on. Anyway, so he put it on my heart to do this video and to share my testimony. And there's a purpose and a plan for it. So anyway, so let me just get started. So, whenever I was a kid, my mom and my dad, obviously, they were married. They ended up divorcing when I was 5-6 years old. And I immediately had a new stepmom. And my dad and my stepmom were married for, I think, about 20 years. I don't know the exact amount of time. And they had a very rocky relationship. Very, very rocky. We were taken care of as kids, my stepbrother and I and stepsister, on that side of it. It's not that we didn't have what we needed or anything like that, but my dad owned a business. He was a boat mechanic, and he owned his own boat shop. We lived behind it, and my stepmom helped him most of the time. She did work some as I got older. She did have a job elsewhere and whatnot, but they had a very rocky marriage. So therefore, as a kid, I witnessed physical, emotional, and mental abuse between them. Some of it constantly throwing things and breaking things. And I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail as far as some of those experiences, just for the sake of, honoring my parents. I will say that despite some of those things that they went through when I was a kid, they've both been delivered. My dad and my stepmom both had been delivered from those struggles, and they're not the same people they used to be. So I praise God for that. But my dad and my stepmom, and I'll talk about my mom in a minute. My dad and my stepmom had trouble with drugs. Okay, while I was in my childhood, which caused the physical abuse and the mental and emotional, the yelling, screaming, throwing things, and just all of the above. I went through some of that myself, mostly mental and emotional, from my stepmother, though. Some of it was just, our normal childhood. You go through those times when you have your teenage kids, right? And they're a little rebellious and whatnot. But for me, with some of those things, I lashed back out because of some of the things she would say to me. And my dad would never do anything about it, but he was always working, and he kind of left the discipline to her. Now, again, I say all those things because she's not a bad person, and I love her, and I still to this day, and I have forgiven these things. But anyway, so that calls what I grew up with as far as the emotional and mental abuse was not only seeing it, and then my dad losing his shop, his business, because of drugs, and being affiliated with selling and also doing those things. He lost everything he had, and he hit rock bottom. By that time, I was just about to graduate high school, and my stepmom and I didn't really get along very well because of them being on those certain things. Would make them, they didn't want to sleep very well. They didn't really take care of themselves. They'd have their highs and their lows, and so therefore the behavior too, they would lash out at me over the smallest thing. Not they, my stepmom. My dad didn't really do a whole lot, but needless to say, I left home just about 3 months prior to graduating high school. I did graduate. I did. But I spent that whole year living with other people because I didn't have a place to stay. And so that whole year I felt like, a complete burden. And I'm thankful that God, Jesus, I had a couple of friends here and there, and some family friends that I still hold very dear to this day, that took me in and allowed me to stay temporarily until the end of the year. The end of that year, I was able to, with housing assistance through financial aid for school and college, be able to get into an apartment that I shared with 3 other girls, and begin to learn to stand on my own, be an adult. So going back, fast forward, or rewinding, and with my mom. So my mom has had 3 children. I was the youngest. She was married and had her first baby when she was 16, and she didn't have very stable of a childhood. My nanny had worked 2 or 3 jobs, and so she wasn't ever home. So she was kind of like, these kids were my mom and her brother and 2 sisters pretty much raised themselves, you know. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know where my grandpa was at the time. I know that they weren't together, my nanny and my grandpa. So they kind of ran wild or whatever. But I think my mom, later in life, she was diagnosed with being bipolar, and she had, psychiatric issues. And I think that, she was also addicted to prescription pills. And I think that because of her being bipolar, she self-medicated a lot. And so long short of it, my mom and my dad, they split up when I was 5 or 6. And my mom hit rock bottom. And at the time, I'm, just so little, there was a time that she was in an apartment and I was visiting her. I don't know how long I'd been there, but she didn't have anything. She had like a bed and a TV and that she had rented. Okay, it's not even a TV she didn't even have her own TV. We would play Sorry and Monopoly, me and her, and that's it. But she would kind of like take these pills and pass out. That was kind of her thing. And I'm little and would be left alone. But anyway, one day she got arrested and it was just me and her there at the apartment. So because she got arrested, I had to ride home in a cop car, and they took me back to my dad. So my dad ended up getting full custody of me, because my mom was very unstable. And so my mom never had custody of me, and we never did consistently throughout my childhood. Really, I never really consistently got to see her. She would date these men that were trash and abusive, and they would be addicted to drugs. And so the times that I'd go over there, she would take her drugs or whatever, and she would fall asleep, and I would be just kind of doing my own thing and watching movies or whatever, and she would just be asleep. And she finally had met one in particular man who was very good to her, that I know loved her very, very much. And there was a good little 2 or 3 years there, maybe 4 years there, time span that she seemed normal and happy. So I lived with her my 6th grade year going into my 7th, and that whole about half of my 6th grade year, things were good and normal. Well, the other half of it, they weren't, going into my 7th grade year, because she and that man split up. They ended up not getting married, and she self-destructed again. So while I was with my mom, there was, I don't know, at least 4 different homes in that year that I probably lived at. And so my dad tricked me and brought me back. And I say tricked me. He told me he bought a 2-way plane ticket, and it was only one way. But my mom, at the tail end of that, before I went back to live with my dad again, she would take her pills, and she would pass out, and I would threaten to throw them down the drain, and she would beg me not to flush them. So I was always in that fight or flight mode, like worried that I was going to wake up and she was gone or something, like dead. And so long short of it, I spent most of my childhood trying to take care of my mom. Sorry. So my mom was a great person. She was a beautiful soul. She struggled a lot, having that mental illness, and then the addiction, and then probably so many things that I didn't even know. And always dependent on men, whether they treated her well or not. And I had to watch that. And then on the other side of it, I had the fighting and the drugs with my dad and my stepmom. And my sanctuary was actually going to school. I made really good grades. I made A's and B's, and I did band. I did, like, as I got older, I had really good friends, and so I kind of stayed away from home as much as I could. I was gone almost every weekend, staying the night with one of my best friends, and anyway, so not having seen a true healthy relationship, I, I never got into drugs or anything like that, but I, thought that the best thing for me would be, to have a boyfriend or whomever, and, that would make me feel love. So I'd be looking for that love in all the wrong places. Yes, I know that song. It's true. I did, because I didn't know any better. And so I ended up developing codependency issues myself. Well, so in high school, I started dating my first real boyfriend, like real boyfriend. We were together for almost 7 years. I think it was the summer, or like tail end of my sophomore year is when we started dating, and he was a good guy. But then he knew, and he saw me go through, all the different, and it got worse as I was a teenager and older, with my parents, and they were hitting rock bottom, and I lived with my grandparents for a little bit during like my sophomore, junior year because of that. And anyway, he and I were supposed to get married, and we didn't because I don't know, I knew in my spirit that he wasn't the right one. And so I left home, and I lived with him and his parents for a little bit. I graduated high school by the grace of God. And the rest of that year is what I was saying before. I lived on and off with other people until I was able to get an apartment with 4 other girls. It was an apartment that you have to be enrolled in college to live there. And I was blessed to have 3 other roommates that were good girls. So I was going to school for a little bit, and then I just couldn't figure out what all I wanted to do. And so I quit that, and I ended up working, at a company downtown Dallas. And that's whenever I met one of my very best friends now, still to this day. And I became very close to her mom, whom I call now my other mom. And she is actually the one who led me to true salvation. Um, I was very broken. I didn't know who I was. Um, I would sabotage my relationship with with, that the one who I was supposed to marry at first. We, I cheated on him, during that relationship, and then it was just bad. I was a very broken person, and man, it's harder to talk about my testimony than I thought. Sorry, guys. And I know it sounds like I'm all over the place, but around that time is whenever I started eating a lot more. I started shopping a lot more, and so money wise, I was terrible with money, and I lived paycheck to paycheck, and I, would overdraw my account a lot, and I would go spend money on clothes and just whatever. And I'd had my car repossessed a couple of times. Just very irresponsible. Just because I was trying to fill the void, I guess, right? So I went through a lot of things in that way because of stemming from childhood, and just really not knowing what true love or marriage or anything looked like, and so anyway, me and he and I broke up after almost 7 years of being together, and I had never once been alone in my life. I'd either lived with my parents or other people or him, and this was before I was really truly saved and called out to Jesus. And I lost it. We split up, and I freaked out. Like, I didn't know what to do with myself. And so I ended up, because I was having an emotional breakdown, severe depression. I didn't know how to be alone. I didn't know how to stop, the thoughts of feeling inadequate, and, just anyway, a lot of evil thoughts, not suicide, but I just didn't know what to do with myself. It was severe depression. And so I had quit my job, and I just left the apartment and moved out, and I moved back home to my dad. And by then they were not doing what they did before. My dad had a stable job, and they were living, like they were supposed to, and it was so much better. And so not long after I moved back to my dad's, I met my ex-husband, and within a month of he and I dating, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And he and I did not get married until the next year, right after she was born. Or no, we didn't get married until she was almost a year old. So yeah, the next year. And at the time, I believed in God. And I will say, I have to go back and say too, when I was 9, I was presented with the opportunity of being baptized, and I talked to the pastor and everything. And I had decided not to get baptized because in my 9-year-old brain, after starting to be trained to think more mature than I should have been, my decision was, I don't understand that fully, so I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna get baptized. And the only times we went to church after that, typically, like, I would go to church with my cousins. We went pretty regularly for a little while, a few months, I guess. And maybe even longer than that, I don't know exactly. But then I kind of became a little rebellious, and I was my my parents didn't want to go to church unless they felt bad about something. Like, they went through this huge fight, and the next day, of causing all kinds of chaos in the house. Then my stepmom would call the cops on my dad. My dad would go to jail for the night, and then she would feel sorry for calling, and they would be fine the next day. Like, they would come back and start or reconcile or whatever, and then they would go to church like that weekend or whatever, however it fell. So I became very resentful for that. Like, I didn't want to just go to church. I couldn't stand the hypocrisy, and I felt like it was hypocritical. And so I was a bit rebellious in that way. Like, I always believed in God. I knew he was real. But then for a long time, I didn't want to be told that you need to go to church. I didn't want to be told those things. So I was a bit rebellious in that way. So anyway, fast forward to, I had my daughter. Well, my ex-husband, whom I married, he's still to this day atheist. And so we had a rocky relation. We argued constantly. My daughter had to see some things. I mean, he never physically hurt me or nothing. It's nothing like that, but it was enough to where I was constantly in turmoil. But then I figured out a lot of it, and on top of being unequally yoked, now that I understand that, I didn't know who I was. And that was another example of looking to fill a void that now I know only God can. And so while we were married, I think he was searching a little bit as far as, whether there was a God or not. And I remember one night he stayed up on his computer until like 2 a.m. He came to bed, and he said that he was listening to some song, and it prompted him to say, okay, if you're real, show me you're real. And he said that he immediately started crying. So I know in that moment that God was trying to show him, yeah, he's real. And I had been, kind of thinking about that off and on. And then within a couple of days, the first time I ever heard God's voice was I was in the shower, and he put it in my spirit that it's time to get baptized. And I remember crying as I'm taking a shower, and I'm like, okay, I will. All right. So I called the church down the road, and I got baptized. I believe it was on a Wednesday. And I was thankful, because I'm not I don't like to be up front and center. And so, some churches want to do these big baptism events that they baptize all at once, like many at once, or in that time, or you can just impromptu go. And so I chose to go to a church that you could just call them up and go. And so I got to do that, and it was private, and it was beautiful. And so that's where my journey really started. I started kind of coming to Jesus during that time. And the closer I got to God, closer I got to Jesus, the even further my husband at the time he moved away, like, essentially, because he didn't believe. So I don't want to go into a lot of details about that whole relationship, because for out of respect for him and my daughter. We're good now. He and I, we have a good co-parenting relationship, and I have forgiven things, and he's happy and I'm happy. But anyway, so I will say this too, that during, not too long after I got baptized. No, it was actually before I got baptized. I guess I could tell you the events that led up to it, because it's actually important for the journey. So, we had moved back to East Texas, and he was a funeral director embalmer, okay? And that's how I knew I could be a nurse. But what happened is we had just moved back, and I had enrolled, actually, before we moved back to East Texas, we lived in another place, and he was working there. And I remember one day I was laying on the couch while my daughter, 2 years old, was playing with toys or whatever, and I had like soap operas on, because I didn't work. I was a stay-at-home for her at the time, and severely overweight and just unhappy. And I remember sitting there one day, and I was looking around, and I was like, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I don't like, if I don't do something. I felt trapped in that marriage. I wasn't happy. And I just knew I had to. It wasn't just about being unhappy. Here, pause. Okay, I'm sorry. My husband was called me twice, so I had to answer. Okay, so where was I? So, anyway, so, I knew at the time, I was like, I can't live like this. My ex-husband and I we argued a lot, and it was hard for me to find a job, and I knew I needed to do something with myself. So I enrolled into college, and I originally was going to go to be a radiology technician, but then we moved to East Texas, and the first day that I was going to go and do my summer classes, we were walking down the steps to the apartment, and my ex-husband was holding my daughter, carrying her downstairs so I could take her to daycare, and he missed a step, and he fell. And when he fell, obviously they both fell, and she smacked her head on the concrete. I was walking in front of them, and I didn't see them fall, but all I could hear was the sound of her head hitting the concrete. So I picked her up, and that whole rest of the week was a daze. I'm just going to be honest. So basically, we took her to the ER. She was very nauseated and throwing up on the way to the hospital. We get there, they did the CT scan, they didn't see anything. So we went home, and by that time she seemed like she was acting fine. Well, the very next day, I was on the phone. I don't remember who I was talking to, and I was just staying home with her to watch her, just in case. I just had a feeling. And anyway, she was fine for a little bit, and then she got sleepy, and so I laid her down on the couch, and she lay down for like 15 minutes, and then woke up, like grabbing her head, just screaming. And she got up, and she was walking, and she was just staggering. And so I knew immediately, I was like, okay, we need to go back. So I called him, my ex-husband, and we left, or he came from work, and we took her back. And thank goodness we did, because we get in there and she's basically sleeping. They did another scan, and then they found that she had a brain bleed. She had a subdural hematoma. And when they found that, they called the neurologist on call. And he came in and he told us that we had a choice. Either we could try to get her care flighted to Children's Hospital in Dallas, or he could do the surgery there. He used to do pediatrics. And the recommendation was, he was concerned that if we tried to get her there, that she wouldn't make it. And so we said, no, do it now. And so she went through surgery, and so basically she almost died. She could have died. So she was in surgery. And I remember we were sitting there in the hospital, and the chaplain came and he prayed with us. And then my ex-husband went away from there while we were praying. But I sat there and I prayed with his grandparents and the chaplain. And immediately when she was done, she then was care flighted, and I rode with her in the helicopter to Children's. And she was in Children's for a little while. It was the scariest time. She was just 2. And anyway, so I don't know, I think we went on a Tuesday. And we ended up in Dallas on a Tuesday, and she was discharged and home. We went home on a Friday. It was that quick, but very scary. And I'm gonna be honest, that time frame is a complete blur. So after that, I got to see, like, during that process, I was inspired by the nurses, and how they all quickly got together and started prepping her for surgery and all that. And I realized at that point, I was like, I could be a nurse. I could do that. I was just fascinated and so thankful. And anyway, that doctor, what are the odds that you have a neurologist who is no longer working on PEDs, that is on call, that could do it? That's only God. And anyway, he was all over that situation. And so again, fast forward, that's around the time after, maybe the next year, I think, is whenever I finally got baptized. And I audibly heard him tell me to do so. So anyway, I get into nursing school, got accepted, and my ex-husband at the time, for while I was in nursing school, half the time lived in another place, because he got a job elsewhere and I couldn't just transfer. So we lived apart for a little while, and it was just rocky anyway, so it worked out. Anyway, after I graduated, we moved down there to where he was, and I remember that's when I started really seeking Jesus. I had watched Left Behind, the newer one with Nicolas Cage, and it kind of freaked me out. And so then I started getting really curious, and that's when I really started studying the Bible, and really just, that's where it started. And then later that year, my ex-husband and I separated, and then by the following January of 2016, we did a pro se divorce, so we were divorced. And so then later, my mom, coming back to my mom had been in and out of assisted livings and drug rehab and stuff like that, and I was all by myself where we were at the time, and I needed to be able to work, and I had a job at the hospital there, and I didn't want to just leave the job, and so my mom came and lived with me, and she helped me get Riley, my daughter, off the bus, and I helped manage her medications and all those different things, and I would try to take her to doctor's appointments if I could. If not, medical transportation would do. Like, we worked in tandem. Well, I left one day to go, me and my daughter, I had a training for work, but I had to go to Dallas. And then that weekend after, I visited with my dad, and my mom stayed home, and she fell or something and was in severe pain, and ended up calling the emergency room and going to the ER. They sent her home that day with more pain medicine and muscle relaxers. And granted, she struggled with those things, overusing. And I wasn't there. And it was a Saturday, and my mom, I called her, and I talked to her that Saturday morning, and she didn't seem fully herself. We kind of argued a little bit because, my fuse was a little short because of I went through a lot with my mom and the whole addiction thing. And anyway, that night she wouldn't answer the phone. And I was really worried about her. And so I sent a police officer, called and had them do a welfare check on her. And they said that she answered the door, and they were telling her that, hey, your daughter is trying to get a hold of you. And they said she looked normal and everything. And that she said something like, well, tell her I'll call her as soon as I can. And that wasn't like my mom. She would always answer my calls, so I knew something was up. Well, so I had a friend, because I was coming home that Sunday, and I just had this feeling. I was like, I think my mom's gonna die. I couldn't get a hold of her, and I had a friend go check on her, and sure enough, she was unconscious on the couch at home. So they were able to get into the house, and I'm still driving to get there, and my mom, when I got there, they said that her blood sugar was fine because she was diabetic, and her heart rate was fine. I don't remember every single thing, but anyway, she wouldn't wake up. But she had coded apparently twice in the ER before I got there, and they did chest compressions. And then they sent her up to ICU, and that was on a Sunday. They sent her up to ICU, and she had been in ICU until that following Saturday. Well, I worked it out with my job that I could do, because I was working home health at the time, and I worked it out with my job that I could go ahead and just see the patients I needed to see, and then spend the rest of the day with her. And I was there every single day as long as I could be, until Friday. That Friday I walked in. As soon as I got off the elevator, I heard a code, and it's like I knew it was her. And so I hurried to the room, and they were doing chest compressions again. And so I went back outside, into the waiting room, and I was kind of tore up, of course, and I was just waiting. It's like whenever the doctors walked back out, I was fully expecting them to tell me that she was gone. Well, they didn't tell me she was gone. They brought her back, but they said that they really didn't think that she was going to make it. You know, she wasn't doing good. And every time they would try to bring her off of the sedation, her respirations would go into like the 40s anytime you moved her, and you can't sustain like that with your respirations like that. You know, like breathing so much, so quickly, very, very tachypnic. And so, anyway, the next day I had to make the decision to take her off of life support. So, my mom passed away the day before Easter in 2016. All the while, I had just gotten a divorce, and that was rough. But I had just gotten a divorce, and then it was like, I cried out to God. Like I just started praying and worshiping and just getting closer to Him. And I'd write scriptures on my mirror, for motivation. And anyway, I went through a lot that year, and then she passed away, and then I got another job offer back in East Texas, which was closer to my family. And so we moved, my daughter and I moved back to East Texas. And I spent, from the time that I got a divorce up until, for that whole year, more than a year, I did not date anybody. I did not, nothing with a man, nothing. And I just spent that time just really getting to know Jesus, and going to church, and just reading scripture, and really just trying to, be close to God. I was just so on fire for Jesus. And it was one of the best years of my life, because that's when I learned how to be on my own and be done with the codependency issues. I had my own place for the first time, that it was just me and my daughter. And I learned how to manage my own life financially. I just, I had a good job, and it was just me and her. And so it was the first time I ever stood up truly on my feet. And based on everything I went through, it was a huge accomplishment. Huge. It was huge for me. It was a big step. And so anyway, I would pray, God, I'll be alone the rest of my life. I don't want any man that is not of you. I don't want to be in the place I used to be. I'm fine. I'll be alone the rest of my life if that is your will. And I prayed this very specific prayer. I picked up this devotional, 31 prayers for my future husband, and opened it to the first day, and it said, to pray this specific prayer for your future husband. And the prayer was, asking God to bring the man, like the specific traits in the man to you, or for him or something. I don't remember the exact verbiage, but anyway, I prayed this very specific prayer, asking him, if I could have, if the man he had for me would be one that loved me for who I am, loved my daughter for who she is, and loved her like she was his own, and was financially stable, not for vain reasons, but just responsible, okay? And several other things. And I kid you not, and that was in like November that year. And I had gone to a women's conference and had some beautiful experiences with Jesus, and so did my daughter. She had dreams and visions, and she had just, it was just beautiful. But anyway, and then I went to visit my brother right after Christmas that year. And the first day I was there, one of his really good friends, they've been friends for a long time. I've known him since I was young, came in the door, and he came to visit me. He always did that whenever I would come down. Well, after a few days, I was there for like a week. So after a few days, he asked me if he could come visit me in Texas. And I told him, I said, I'll think about it. So funny. I did eventually let him come visit, and it was just history after that. So that's who I'm married to now, my husband, and it's very beautiful because he treated me, and still treats me from the beginning, even until this day, treats me how a man should treat a woman, a husband should treat his wife. And we have a whole story, and it's beautiful. And I'm just going to say that he and I got together. He proposed to me on April 8th of 2017, and we got married on 7/8/2017. And we got married at my other mom's house, and her house was known for the weddings. We would all want to have our weddings there. It's a beautiful piece of land, and we were the 5th wedding there. So you know how I like numbers. So 7 is completion, 8 is new beginning, 17 is victory, and 5 is grace. And I want to tell you that throughout the whole time, betrothal, even to the moment I walked down that aisle, I prayed and I told God, I said, or Jesus, God, I said, hey, if this is not of you, I ask you to please put up the roadblocks. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to marry somebody. I don't want to be with anybody. I don't want to do anything that is not of you. And the story about that day is it was hot. And what's funny is that the power went out and there was rain, a storm that surrounded the place. There were tornadoes around that was coming down around the house, but it never came to the house. It was just all around it, which was amazing. And then the best part of it is that I was so calm that day. The power went out. I didn't freak out. It was a very relaxing, beautiful day. No stress. I mean, believe it or not, I really had no stress. And because of the storm, it cooled it off. So it was beautiful. And then we had a magnificent honeymoon. So I'm just going to say that I can tell you right now, with the soulmate thing, I have the firsthand experience of what Jesus is saying with soulmates. He gave me my soulmate. There are times whenever my husband has talked to me, and I can literally see Jesus in his eyes. I know it's him speaking through him. I know that's kind of hard to explain, but I'm telling you that it's real. And so so now we come to, he and I have been married since then, and then I have said before that my very first message that I've gotten from Jesus was in October last year. And so from the time right after we moved here, because my husband and I, we got married in July of 17. We didn't actually live, together because we lived in two different states. We didn't actually get to live together and move together until the very end of 2017. And a lot of that is because I had a custody agreement that limited me to Texas. Well, God did a work there too. We were going to have to go through this huge battle with my ex-husband, but then one day JB and my husband and my ex-husband talked, and they get along fantastically, and he agreed to allow us to move without having to go through lawyers. And so that was God again. And so then you all know that, and I've said before that I went through and studied Torah, like really studied scripture. God gave me wisdom on a lot of things. I don't know everything about the Bible, but he gave me a lot of wisdom on the Bible. And I've spent the last few years like really studying hard and reading scripture, and he's allowed me to gain that. And then he just started speaking to me again in October, like really. And I say again because I've heard his voice before, but he really started consistently speaking to me October 29th of 2022. And delivered me from a religious spirit. And this year has been such a blessing. So many blessings. And, I've been able to experience Jesus in such a way. He's funny. He's romantic. We joke, we laugh. It's really amazing. Just some of the things that, it's just been a beautiful gift. And I'm so blessed and so honored to be able to do what he has called me to do. And so why now? Why this testimony? Well, none other than to glorify him, because ever since the beginning, he's had his hand on my life. He has. We all have a story. Our testimonies is what inspires people, to get saved. And it's just knowing what he's done in my life is so important, and I acknowledge that he's been there the whole time. With the whole situation with the riding in the cop car when I was a kid, because my mom was arrested. When I went through some healing, I asked him, I said, "Where were you, Jesus? Where were you?" And he gave me a vision, and he showed me that he was sitting next to me in that cop car the whole time. He was there. He's been there through it all. And so I only have gotten to where I am now because of him. And so with that said, a lot of people don't understand, why does Jesus use certain people for certain things? And I don't know fully, but I can say this, that, whenever he chooses to use someone, it's for a good reason. And he told me this morning, he said, "My child, you have walked through fire, and now you walk on water." Because it is the fire, it is the crushing that produces the oil for anointing. And that's how we fill up our lamps. We fill up our lamps because we've been through trials that have crushed like olives, or wine that's been developed by crushing of grapes to fill the wineskins, or to fill the lamp with oil. Because that's what faith is. It produces that faith and obedience to his voice. And so all I can say is I hope that this inspires someone, and I hope that it brings someone to salvation. And I hope that you guys understand that, we're not out here just speaking words. We have a whole history that's brought us to this point. Doesn't mean that we're special. We're just normal people, just like you guys. We all have a testimony. We all have things that we've gone through. So I just pray that you guys receive this well, and I thank you for listening this long. I know it's long. There's probably many other things I could talk about, but I think that I've said all that he wants me to say. So I love you guys so much. I know that there's a lot of you that don't necessarily agree with us, with me, with it, and that's okay. It's not about that. But I'm going to keep doing what he tells me to do. So, but I love every single one of you. Every single one of you so, so much, because he loves you. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, wherever you're watching from and whenever. See you later.